Hello everyone, can you hear me clearly? Yes? Okay, brilliant. So, my talk today is going to be about the decision-making process of an asylum seeker coming to the United Kingdom. And this is based on research that we've been doing at the National Centre for Social Research for over a year now. And prior to that, a lot of research that I'd done on both sides of the Mediterranean, looking at refugees and asylum seekers coming into Europe. So, let me, and I will focus particularly on some of the assumptions that we have and the realities of asylum seeker decision-making. So, I think the first thing to do is really look at what the issue is and what is the problem, really. And I think if we agree on a diagnosis of the problem, then we can start thinking about solutions and we can start thinking a bit more clearly about the processes that are in place for asylum seekers to come into the United Kingdom. Now, the issue is very much related to an increase in the number of asylum seekers coming here via small boats. So if you look at this slide, you can see that there's been a sharp increase between 2018 and 2022. But this slide only gives you part of the picture, because actually, if you want to look at the full picture, you need to look at the decrease that's happened parallel to that for asylum seekers coming into the country on the back of lorries and via other routes. So really, what has happened is not a sharp increase in the numbers, it's actually rerouting of asylum seekers from one route to another. Now, this slide is about the number of asylum applications in this country, and particularly a focus on the backlog. So if you look at the number of applications from 2011 to 2022, there is an increase, but it's not really quite a worrying, significant increase. The increase is actually in the backlog of asylum applications. There's a huge, huge backlog. The third slide looks at the UK, the situation in the UK compared to other European countries, and particularly the backlog per 10,000 people and the number of asylum applications per 10,000 people. And if you look at the UK versus Germany, for example, we're actually getting far less applications compared to Germany. So 2021, I'll just give you a figure, there were about 49 to 50,000 asylum applications in the UK. What was the number for Germany? It was 190,000 applications. So it's important to contextualize the discussion and contextualize our understanding of the problem within the broader evidence. So what we've been looking at and what I'm keen to talk to you about today within the upcoming, 15 minutes, is really the decision-making process of why people come to the United Kingdom. So of those 50,000 applications that we get, who are they? And why do they come here? Are we a destination of choice for them? Or are we a destination by circumstance? And I think that picture of the entangled rope is very much a key conclusion from the reflections that we've been doing within my team. It really is quite complex. And by complex, I don't just mean complicated. I mean that there are so many factors that are at interplay with one another over a long period of time, from when they leave their country of origin, through all the countries that they go through until they make their way over here. It's quite a complex process, and it's a process that changes over time and changes because of the circumstances. What we've been looking at more particularly within that decision-making process are four different things. One is we wanted to look at the factors that influence the decision-making process. So, what are the factors? The contextual, political, economic, environmental, what are the factors that are at play that influence the decision-making process? The second thing that we wanted to look at is the complexity of choice. So how are choices being made, right? And do those choices change over time, or are they fixed? Somebody leaving sub-Saharan Africa today, are they thinking UK is my destination? Or are they just escaping harm? and escaping, persecution and thinking, I just want to get out of here, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. So we wanted to look at that complexity of choice. We also wanted to look at the role of chance encounters. What happens during the journey, who you meet, who you engage with, the networks that you have access to, the social media platforms that you target. All of that influences your choices. And then we wanted to look at the migration infrastructure, and that kind of intersects with the choice element. So what kind of resources do they draw on? Financial resources, infrastructure in terms of, technology, social media, information. What do they draw on during that journey? And the last point, which is very relevant to this week, is the influence of policy and practice. Do policies really make such a huge difference? Will the illegal immigration bill make a huge difference? Will it be kind of a game changer in terms of the number of people wanting to come to the UK on small boats? Now that's a question that I'm really very much posing for all of us to think about, because there are no easy answers for those questions. So I'm going to walk through some of the key insights, right? And again, those key insights emerge out of a very lengthy review of the evidence, of the literature, interviews that we've conducted over a long period of time, and ongoing research that I and my team at NatCen are doing. Now, the first insight is there are a diversity of factors that influence asylum seeker decision-making in choosing or ending in the UK. And those can be individual. So your individual characteristics determine whether or not you choose to leave. Remember, 90% of people choose to stay. It's actually a very small minority that chooses to leave their country. And when they leave, their first choice of destination is not to cross the Mediterranean. Most migration happening within Africa stays within the African continent. And that's why countries like Lebanon and so on have significantly higher numbers of asylum seekers, right? So there are individual factors. What kind of person are you in terms of whether you're more entrepreneurial, you're more likely to want to and to take on this difficult journey? Familial, do you have family in the country? Do you have family in other countries that you would want to go to? Political, the political context within which you live. And of course, we've witnessed that during the Arab uprisings. We've witnessed that with all the conflicts that have taken place in Africa. National, international factors that come into play. And most important of all, the unknowables. And those unknowables are idiosyncrasies. They're idiosyncratic factors that are very much specific to your own journey, right? To your own journey as an asylum seeker. And they are very specific to you. They're individual specific, and they cannot be simply replicated and considered kind of the norm for everybody else, right? And those idiosyncrasies are because there's a time lapse between when somebody leaves their country of origin and the time when they come to the UK. There's quite a long period of time in the middle. And during that period of time, they're met with new circumstances, new choices, new networks, and that changes their choices and changes their patterns and what they decide to do. But what we found across, again, what the evidence really points towards is that people choose destinations if they are in a choosing context. They choose destinations where they can have a viable future, right? So, and that is very much human nature. You want to go somewhere where you can have a future. You're escaping persecution, you're escaping very difficult circumstances, but ultimately what determines your choice of destination is that viability of a future. And the other thing that also came up very clearly is that you're always faced with constrained choices, right? You're not really operating in a context where the choices are open for you, right? Where you choose the country that you want to go for. That's not the case. Depends on the networks that you have and the levels of access to resources that you've got. Now, if you look at the pictures at the bottom, so on the right-hand side, that's a picture from a detention center in Libya. Now, that's part of a paper that I wrote back in 2016 on the situation in detention centres in Libya, how difficult circumstances were. As part of that research, I interviewed asylum seekers that would have originally had Libya as their country of destination, but because of the governance breakdown in the country, it became a country of transit, or became a stepping stone for them to cross the Mediterranean and go somewhere else. And the stories that I managed to get from them quite horrifying, heartbreaking, right? And the single most important theme that comes out of those stories is that we just want to get out of here. This is hell, right? We just want to get out of here. We don't know exactly how or where we want to go. We just, anywhere is better than here, right? And that is just one example, again, of how choices are being constrained. Now, the other picture is actually of, it was related, I think, 2018. A young boy from Darfur died while attempting to cross the channel. And again, that's another example of the situation happening in Darfur and the ongoing conflict and people trying to escape from the conflict and just to reach safety and not being able to make it in the process. And that's another factor that you also need to keep in mind, is as we conduct those studies, our analysis is actually skewed towards people who've actually been successful. There are so many others, thousands of others, that have not been successful, right? Have not been able to make it across the Mediterranean. Their stories are unknown as well. The other key insight I also want to put forward is that, which I talked about before, is that choices change across the migratory journey. They're not the same. And chance encounters and opportunities are really crucial in determining those destinations. So there's a study that was done in 2015 that looks at migration trajectories at the intersection between personal characteristics and the social environment. And mind you, those diagrams are actually quite oversimplified, because if you look at the personal characteristics, people are either hustlers or pawns, for example. But they're not, some people are neither. They can be a mix in between, yeah? And sometimes you can start off as a hustler and then you become a pawn, or you start off as a pawn and you become a hustler during the journey. The social environment is also quite complex, so it's not just a matter of a sending context and a receiving context. There's so many contexts in between that as an asylum seeker you have to go through, and that, again, determines where you end up. Another key point is about the role played by imagination over here, right? There is the imagined destination. And that imagined destination may or may not correlate with reality. And this is a really important point, is that the calculus of an asylum seeker is quite different from the calculus that policymakers have in mind when they legislate or put forward laws and so on to deter asylum seekers. The actual calculus for an asylum seeker is very much driven by what's called perception bias. So they may perceive, they may think, and on the other end, I'll have a much better life, right? My children are going to be safe, or I'm going to enjoy more rights, yeah? And this may or may not be true, okay? And that process plays a very important part of the decision-making process. It might actually make them overestimate in certain contexts their own capabilities, right? Because you're so hopeful for change. You're so driven by that imagined destination. You think, well, if I make it, my life is going to be so much better, then maybe I should give it a chance. Even if that means it's 20% chance of success. For them, 20% is big. It's significant, right? And that's where that process of cognitive migration comes into play. You migrate mentally first before you migrate physically. And you imagine what that means. Now, with cognitive migration, there's also the networks that you have, and so the role of social media and who you talk to kind of paints a very particular picture of what that destination looks like. Am I going over time?
Okay, another 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll be really quick then. Now, the role of smugglers is really important, and all I can say really quickly here is that, again, you need to have there's a need for a more nuanced understanding of who those smugglers are, because there's so many different profiles. The idea of a smuggler is, that criminal sitting somewhere in a country, kind of plotting over how to move people across the Mediterranean, is not really the norm when we look at the literature on smuggling or when we interview people who've engaged with those groups. And there is the idea of the honest smuggler, right? That actually, some of them have really good profiles in the countries where they operate. They're considered good people who are trying to help others have a better life or escape persecution, escape a difficult situation. So again, that kind of plays a role as well in terms of trying to understand what kind of policies would work in that context. I talked about social networks. Again, there is no evidence that restrictive asylum policies have an impact on the number of asylum seekers coming to the UK. There's no evidence. There is evidence from Australian context, maybe, that it would work there. But again, you cannot, with policies, it's not a matter of, you can't copy policies from other countries and paste them over here because the geographic context, everything is just so different. But within the context of the UK, there is no evidence. What has happened is actually a rerouting of asylum seekers. Asylum seekers come to countries where they feel they are going to enjoy rights that they are not able to find within their countries. And this has been one of the factors that come up a lot in the literature. Now, in terms of solutions, I think the only thing I can say is that what our research points towards is the need to depart from much more linear thinking, where you think, if I do X, Y. If I do this, then they're going to do that. If I put in more restrictions, then people are going to stop crossing the Mediterranean and crossing the Channel, and smugglers we're going to break their business model. There's a need for a much more nuanced thinking that takes into account a lot of those complexity factors that I've put forward. And thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sherine.